Hello, Cheryl. How are you?
Hi, Jim. I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm good, thanks.
Let's see. Ed is there. Janice.
Hello.
Hello.
I forgot my gift. It's in the office.
I thought you were re-gifting it to me.
Oh, okay.
We'll have to negotiate that.
Finders keepers, I think, if you
I
leave.
think so.
Sorry I
Hey,
missed it.
Rick.
Oh,
We
can
had
you hear
our.
me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just want to make sure it's working. All right.
And Carol, if you could give me screen share or make me a co-host or something, whichever, that would be great. Or make me host.
I was so upset to get that last email.
Well, hang on a second before you. I'm going to address it in a moment here.
Mm.
Oh, boy. Sorry, Rich.
We have one attendee with us here. Ed Scheidler's an attendee, so we need to promote Ed here.
Screwed that up.
I went to launch meeting somehow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna launch it.
That's
See what
fine.
happens.
That's
Nothing
fine.
happened.
Reg, I want to make you a host.
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. I guess I'm back.
And Ed and Penny, are they there?
Yeah, I'm just promoting them to be a panelist here. Hopefully that's working. Yes, it is. A moment. There they are. Can we have a sound check there, Penny?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, loud and clear. If you could tilt the screen down a little bit, we've got sort of half your faces here.
Yes, I will.
There we go. A little bit more. Well, that's okay, but if you can do it a little tad more, that would work better.
Up there in the right hand corner.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Hit the big.
Well, you wanted me to turn the volume up, so.
Okay, so
Yes, dear, I had to stop. I had to do that to get to the.
if we're ready, we don't have any attendees, interestingly, but we have a quorum, and so I think we can get the meeting started.
Right.
Full screen, okay.
Box.
One more second for some
Okay.
Rosemary Way tech support. Okay, you folks ready?
Sure.
Ready?
Yeah, okay.
I know why we have no attendees.
Why is that? Oh, well,
turn it up.
let's get the meeting started before we. So this is the a special board meeting of the Needham Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. And I am going to call the roll of commissioners here since we're on a virtual meeting. Reg Foster is here.
Jim Flanagan's here. Ed Scheidler is here.
Penny Kirk here.
Janice Bender is present.
Great. And we have our annual guest, Rick Shaw, a fee accountant.
Hi, Rick.
How you doing?
Hi, Rick.
Guys.
Robard, or however you pronounce it here. And I just want to state for the record that the Secretary of the Needham Housing Authority provided adequate notice of this meeting by preparing and posting a notice dated December 5th, setting forth the date, time, and agenda of this meeting, and filed it with the clerk of the town of Needham. And I just wanted to say, just for starters, that this is a one agenda item meeting that we have every year to go through our annual budget. We found it that it makes sense to make time for this so that we can have a robust discussion with Rick as necessary. So we're going to jump into that in a minute, Rick. I have a couple of announcements from the chair. that could not be reasonably anticipated in advance of this meeting, or at least posting the notice of this meeting here. So bear with us for a minute here. So I've got sort of a good news and bad news, a set of announcements here. The good news is yesterday, Wednesday, the 11th, we received word from the town clerk, Louise Miller, that after a long wait from last spring 2024 town meeting, where town meeting unanimously approved Articles 18 and Article 19, the zoning articles that permit the redevelopment of the Linden Street. We're now calling it Linden Terrace redevelopment. That approval came in, several pages of legalese and approval, and so those town meeting articles are official, and we have the zoning relief needed to do the project. So I didn't want to wait a week to tell you all about that news that was hot off the press here. I'll send around the actual legal letter we got if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. And then yesterday, just coincidentally, is we had received a special permit approval unanimously from the planning board dated November 6th, 2024, allowing, us, with several pages of conditions, but permitting and allowing for the redevelopment of the Linden Terrace project. And under town bylaw, there's I think it's 20-day appeal period where any voter of the town of Needham can file an appeal or then ask to have it overturned or object to it or something like that. And yesterday was in fact the date that 20-day period expired. So that was another good piece of news, except for the bad news part of my announcements here today, which is earlier this week, a process server showed up in Cheryl's office and served a notice of a lawsuit that's been filed against the Needham Housing Authority and the Needham Planning Board, objecting to the Linden Terrace redevelopment. And the lawsuit was filed by one of our tenants, Jim Burke, who happens to have been in the past a practicing attorney and is still, legally entitled to file lawsuits in Superior Court. And I just sent the board members out about a half an hour ago a copy of the lawsuit. So I know you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. And tonight, since it's not on the agenda, we won't be particularly talking about it either. But I just wanted to let you know that although it's a little hard to understand, there are three allegations. One is that, and I'm boiling down several pages, so feel free to read it for yourself, but that there's a 1959 deed restriction restricting the property development to elderly housing, and that hasn't been carried forward into the present zoning for the area, the affordable housing district that I just referenced there. Number two, the fire chief and the fire department, even though they reviewed our plans fairly thoroughly, they did not have the authority to approve the plans with respect to the fire lane design behind the proposed Linden Terrace building. And there's an legal argument made for that. And the third area was that there was asbestos in the existing Linden Street buildings, the 18 residential buildings and the former office at 164 Linden Street. And it had not received proper consideration by an environmental analyst, and that it was the project would be endanger nearby neighbors and also school children and people, kids playing on the fields, and therefore that is not good. And so, because of all that, the lawsuit seeks a restraining order to stop progress on the Linden Terrace redevelopment project. So having received this, I found out about it like late Monday afternoon. We did meet with Bob Smart, our attorney, and he says the following: NHA must file an answer to this lawsuit acknowledging this by December 20th, which is next Friday. If we don't file a response, then we risk having a summary judgment against us. So it's a scramble, to say the least, in the holiday season. That doing this sort of legal work is a very specialized area of zoning appeal legal work, which is not Bob Smart, and that we should be hiring Toot Sweet, a attorney that specializes in this sort of legal work. It's a subspecialty here. And Bob also provided us a recommendation of some attorneys, that he knows of that have practiced in the Needham area, and he's run across and so forth. So this Cheryl and I were sort of kind of dealing with the good news and the bad news arrived on Monday, Tuesday, and the good news arrived on Wednesday. We're going to follow Bob's recommendations, which means we need to engage another attorney, and it's going to be expensive, several $100s an hour of legal expenses. And we have to get that person on right away, and we have to start drafting a response right away. I've also notified our development partners from Peabody and AHSC, and they provided they endorse this course of action recommended by Bob, and they are helping us with ideas. And that's the report. Now, also, at a request of our attorneys, just to remind the commissioners, I think we know this already, but just, again, remind the commissioners, obviously this is a public meeting, so this information is going to be public knowledge and should be. But if you're asked for comment by other people in town or members of the press or or tenants, please don't respond with any comments or opinions for obvious reasons, hopefully, to everybody here. Do not seek to talk out to any tenants or residents, especially the plaintiff. And the other thing I just want to let you know is, obviously this is not on the agenda today, so it's really not a proper subject for discussion, although I'm sure you have a teaming with questions. But we will put it on the agenda for next Thursday's regular monthly board meeting.
Oh, with all those people from across town.
Well, and also we will probably likely want to have an executive session to review things that wouldn't be discussed in public. So that's the update.
Well, thank you.
So with that, we go to the actual agenda item. Mr. Rick Shaw, our faithful fee accountant, who's kept us out of trouble all these many years. How many years have you been with us, Rick? Oh, you're on mute there. You're on mute.
I'm on mute because my dog started barking. I didn't think you'd want to listen to that during your update. So I've been doing it for 30 years. I think I've been in Needham for probably 22, 23.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And I just want
a
to
long time.
say for the record, relative to a couple of 3 years ago, you look like a picture of wonderful health. I know you were struggling there, and so it's great. Hopefully, I'm not
Thanks.
imagining it, but you look really good.
I'm getting there. I had the neck surgery, so like I have to limit my computer time. And I'm stubborn and I like to work. So sometimes I go a little too far and then I go, oh, too late. And then I gotta just let everything calm back down. But thank you
Well,
for that.
I'm sure your wife or family members or children think it's a good idea for you to limit your computer time.
Oh,
Knowing
believe
what
me,
you
I've
do
had
every else.
multiple conversations. I'm just kind of stubborn, as you've known me for a long time, as you know. So you want to just get right into it?
Yes, and I'm going to go ahead and screen share your budget
Okay.
and let me just get the right window, which is this one. And then I just tell me how and when you want to scroll through things.
Okay. So I'm just going to start with some basic general guideline stuff.
Do you want
I
me to
think I
start
know.
with your
Go ahead. What?
transmittal memo? Do you want me to start with your transmittal memo? I have that as well here.
No, this is good.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Yep. Just stay where you are. If anybody doesn't know me, I think most of you do, just so you know, our CPA firm does about 70 housing authorities, mostly in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, a couple in Connecticut. And one of the things we decided a long time ago is this is all we do. We don't do taxes. We don't do audits. We got enough business doing this, and we didn't want to thin out our services. So we specialize in housing authorities, whether it's consulting, budgeting, doing the books, dealing with the auditors, dealing with the boards, presentations, whatever it takes, basically. That's what we do, depending on the client. So the budget guidelines for this year, which your year starts January 1st, came out in September, which is actually a little bit earlier than usual, the beginning of September. And maybe even the end of August. And because of that, you got to understand that the way the housing authorities work, different housing authorities have different fiscal years. So I have a bunch of housing authorities whose fiscal year started July 1st, and then another group that started October 1st, then your group that starts January 1st, and then another group that starts April 1st. So I've done about 60% of the budgets that I need to do for the state already. And probably half of those have already been approved. So I kind of know what they're looking at, what they got going on, what changes, or what things in particular they're focusing on. So every year these guidelines come out. And one of the key points of the guidelines for the state budgets is it tells you how much you're allowed to increase your allowable spending by. In prior years, that number would be 2%, 3%, very rarely over 5%. The last 3 years, it's been 9%, 13%, and 12% this year. So they've significantly increased the allowable ability to spend in the line items you see on that page 1. That is, quote, your operating budget. Those are the operating expenses that number is used to calculate. The other thing that they did this year is they're allowing up to a 9% increase in administrative staff, which, Cheryl gives me the positions and the rates that she proposes, and I just want to make sure it's below 9%. Or, we have to explain it a little differently. And then they did something different with maintenance labor, and some of you will remember this and some of you won't. And if you remember, last month you approved a budget revision that already got approved by the state, by the way. So that's already approved by the state. And the reason for that revision was strictly because of maintenance labor, because they completely changed the way they want maintenance labor done going forward. In the old days, the maintenance men would get a raise April 1st based on labor and industry. That's how it worked. Whatever labor and industry was, that's what they got, unless you were the supervisor and you were allowed to get a couple dollars over that rate. So they completely changed the guidelines, and they want the maintenance men and the administrative staff to kind of be on an equal playing field. So what they did is they said you can increase the maintenance line item, line 4410, which is in the middle of that page, and I'll go over this in a little bit more detail later. This is just one of the big changes. Up to 9%. As you can see, it's increasing by 8. That was the reason for the budget revision. I don't want to get overly technical, but it was almost like a advanced algebra problem from back when I was in school. I had to figure out what the number needed to be in last year's budget to be able to increase it by 9% this year and get it to work. It was very confusing, and it was only a 1-year thing. Well, this will matter. But going forward, the way it's going to work is, if the guidelines come out next year and they say, you're allowed to increase staff by 5%, that's going to be admin and maintenance. They're not going to be completely treated separately like they have been in the past. Except for the first year, this will be much easier and much simpler to understand. Now, so labor and industry is still considered a minimum, so you can't pay below maintenance, labor and industry, which comes out in April. But the guys are projected to get 8 to 9% in the current budget, so there's no way they're going to be under labor and industry. And there's backup to that further on in the package. So that's kind of the key of terms of changes. One of the things I did with your budget that I don't have to do very often is I went line by line, account by account, vendor by vendor to try to get a better handle on your expenses. There were some, overruns and underruns that I can usually easily explain. I just wanted to get a better understanding of where you were. You're always doing the budget before the year started. So there's always going to be overruns and underruns. It's a budget. It's a projection. It's an estimate. But I think I wanted to make sure it was closer because some of the things just didn't look right to me. And I did find a couple things, nothing major, but I just had to adjust some numbers. So I literally went through every single one of these lines in this budget and every single vendor that was charged those accounts to figure out a good number going forward into next year. So if things don't look right next year at all, then it's going to be very obvious why, because I went through everything as much as I could. So if you look at the revised 24 total of 717 and then the 25 line item total of 785, you can see that your budgeted expenses increased $67,000. All right, which is 9%. That's not the whole amount, because the way it works is they give you a cap. Like that's the calculation that I do. That number's in the top left. It's 841,463. You can see that cap number in the top left of page 1. That's your total allowable expenses. That's what your subsidy is calculated on. So the key point of how it works is if you don't spend all your money, you don't give it back. You keep it and it goes into your operating reserve. That's how you build your operating reserve, by underspending your cap. You're expected to underspend your cap. So if you spent $800,000 of your total, which is more than I have budgeted, your reserve would go up $41,000. Okay, so just understand that. If you go over your cap, your reserve goes down. If you spend under your cap, your reserve goes up. That's kind of a key point. One of the things I've been going over with Cheryl is we figured out the master process of getting admin money out of your capital projects in the state, right, Cheryl?
Yes, absolutely.
That's right. So that's something, I don't know if you guys remember, because I harp on this. I yell at my clients. I give them a hard time. I can be kind of obnoxious when I have to be to make a point. And it's like, if they're going to give you money, you've got to get that money. You've got to take it. And one of the ways to do that is when you have a contract, like say you were doing roofs and it was $500,000. They might budget you $20,000 of admin money. That can be requisitioned and put into your reserve for maybe maybe a truck a year or two down the road. So you've got to take advantage of that when you have it. And Cheryl's doing that now. We went through the process and she knows how to do it. She talked to her RCAT guy.
Yeah.
RCAT's the guy that oversees the project, and she knows the process now. So that's going to start happening, which is good. It's important. That needs to happen. In terms of the specific line items, I'm trying to think of how I want to do something real quick. I'll go through the line items relatively quick because basically, like I said, these are 90% actuals. And then, you know, when I do the salaries, it's pretty much what Cheryl proposed. Insurance and benefits are based on your actual bills. I know what your retirement bill is. I know what your health insurance is. I know what your property insurance is. So those are all pretty much actuals. So when you start getting down to the nitty gritty, you know, one of the things we went over was legal. Okay, last year the legal number wasn't high enough to cover your actual expenses. So you see on the left that October actual, that's based on your October financial statements that I've already done that you'll get at your next board meeting. So, you know, you just use common sense. Okay, you spent 14. So that required, Cheryl and I had a conversation. I'm like, do you expect to have those same type of expenses this year? And she said yes. So we bumped it up to 16. Kind of logical, trying to, you know, just accurately depict the cost. Now, the thing to remember in this case is the state is going to cover the first $8,000 of those expenses. So they will fund you the first $8,000. The reason why they do that is because in the past, they used to have a state-funded legal pilot attorney. So you didn't have to pay anything if you didn't want to use a different attorney. The state supplied you with one. They stopped that program. So to compensate, which it really doesn't compensate, you know, I've seen housing authorities with much huger, bigger legal expenses than this. You know, they're covering part of the legal cost, but not all of it. So there is an additional cost to the housing authority since the pilot attorney ceased to exist. In travel, even though you're well underrun in that line item, I very rarely decrease that unless a housing authority is in tough financial situation. And I know there's been some turnover, there's some new staff, there's some requests for training. If a board member wants to go to a conference, you just want to make sure you have enough room in that line item to cover those things because you have the ability to do that. There's nothing keeping you from doing that. I know Cheryl expressed, you know, a desire for staff training. So we want to make sure, you know, there's enough in there. Because when it comes to staff training, any hotel, travel, it's kind of weird. You actually have to split the costs. Any hotel, travel, mileage, meals, that goes to travel. Any conference fees goes into 4190, which is a couple lines below administrative other. The accounting fee, I have a 2-year contract. And in my fee, I've built in a increase based on the annual. So even though it looks like it's going up 12% in this program, but in total, it's going up $100 a month, which is a 4% increase. It's just most of it's in this program. That's standard everywhere that I go and everywhere I've done. If you look at the audit, I reduced that because you had something called agreed upon procedures. I don't know if you've ever familiar with this, but it's a report the auditors do. Not only do they do a full audit, of which you never have any financial findings, which is important to understand. You know, that's my job to make sure the finances are good and make sure you don't have any financial findings. But they also do a state report that's called an agreed upon procedures. And they used to have to do it every single year. And they finally realized it's kind of overkill. It's like a lot of work. It's a lot of burden on the housing authority to supply all the information and the paperwork that they need to do the reports. So they change it to every other year. So in fiscal year 25, you don't have an AUP. You'll be the next year. So I looked at, they have a chart. They gave me the list of clients, which ones have it 1 year, which ones don't have it. So you're not going to have one. Administrative other, you can see that went up significantly after going through the lines. It was really just a function of the phone bills were a lot higher than I thought they were, and just basically maintenance supplies and computer costs. I mean, and that's really everything. Administrative other is basically everything associated with the office that's not an employee. So copiers, phones, supplies, dues, conference fees, the whole kit and caboodle, basically everything administrative.
Is that where rent goes?
Yep, rent's there, but that rent, I checked the rent number. The rent number was right. I actually bumped it up just in case it goes up during the year.
I do think I would just comment that I think we had a 7-year lease when we moved in. So we have a certain amount of certainty as to what that number
Right.
is going to be but we probably need to make a tickler when we getting closer to the end of that lease to think about making sure that we can renegotiate from a position of strength with the landlord here.
It's in the mid 70s
Yes.
right now,
Yes.
like mid to high 70s, just so you know.
Yeah.
Maintenance labor, like we talked about, that's a little different than it used to be. In the past, we would just put in the prior year rates because we wouldn't know what they were going to be till April 1st. Now it's based on the calendar year. That schedule is behind here too. I always attach the salary schedules. Maintenance materials, that's just a number based on prior spending levels. So you can see last year you were at 43,000. I wanted to make sure it was funded properly. It might be a little high, but that's okay. You want to be conservative and make sure there's enough money in these accounts to cover your expenses. And then contract costs, that went up as well. One of the things the big increases, and it was a bigger difference in the federal side, was plumbing and heating costs during the year were pretty high. And the rubbish was higher than was in prior year budgets. So this is a pretty good functional budget. And it should, if there's overruns and underruns, I don't get overly worked up over overruns and underruns if they make sense. It's because it's a budget. If you can explain it and you understand why, then you can deal with it and make the proper management decisions. And that's kind of the key. And like I said, you can see the insurance went up. And that was a function of property and workers' comp, and employee benefits went up. And really, I have some notes here, so I just have to refer to them real quick. The health insurance went up about $20,000 a year. Standard. It goes up everywhere every year. We know that. And that'll change during the year as people come on, depending if they're single, family, that's a moving number. It's accurate with a increase factor built in to cover some of that. And, it could go down too. The one thing we don't know is what the retirement bill is going to be for next year from the town. And I bumped in a percentage increase because that can go in any direction because it's a function of the market. It's a function of other factors in the town. So you don't know if that's going to go up or down. I always bump it up just to cover, I don't want to be caught, off guard by a big increase in costs that we weren't projecting. So that's your operating budget. Those are your operating expenses. And I just want to go down as you calculate the subsidy.
Rick, sorry,
Yeah.
if I could just interrupt, Rick or Cheryl. Who are we using for health insurance? And are we using, my understanding there's a state system. Can we access that one or not?
We use the GIC. Our staff have a choice through the GIC to choose
Good.
Harvard, Tufts. They have their options. We don't have just one particular provider.
Okay, is that GIC, that's the state employee based? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Good,
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so basically every housing authority pays the same vendor, pays the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They can pick their insurance based on the choices. And because of the way your budget is, the increases always are effective July 1st. So I already knew what the increases were when I did this budget. Whereas when I do some of them, I don't know because they're done earlier. So those are the new updated rates per health insurance.
Yeah, we've been seeing 20%. Back in my days when I was running organizations, it seemed like it would fluctuate and you could negotiate, but
no, it's definitely not 20%. But what it is it's effective based on the amount of employees. And so it's different. It's not like a flat rate increase.
got it.
So
Sorry.
I'll give you an example. So if somebody retires from the housing authority, they stay on your health insurance. And then if somebody takes that position and goes on health insurance, you basically added somebody to your health insurance because they still get paid and charged through the housing authority, which is one of the big issues with health insurance in the state is I have housing authorities that have 3 employees and have 8 employees on their health insurance over the time as people have retired. And, then that number moves based on staffing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So because the cap is the 841 and we're not spending all of it, when you calculate your subsidy, you can see the subsidy's higher than your net loss. That's because they're giving you the difference of what you haven't spent. Okay, so that's why you see the $451,000 of loss and the $507 of subsidy. That difference is $55,773, which is the amount that you haven't spent. Okay, so just understand that. So you're already budgeted to make some money because the cap's gone up literally 30%, 35% in 3 years. So you really shouldn't have to spend your whole cap, in theory. One of the things, and I've literally found this out in the last 48 hours, and you can see this number. This is like the whole key to the budget and where you are financially, is this reserve augmentation line. So what's happening is I put this in here because I heard rumors that the state was going to fund housing authorities to get the reserve up to what they like to see it at, which is 35% of a formula, which is half of your operating costs. A formula that I calculate, which is in there, which is 50% of 35% of the 581, which is your maximum operating reserve, kind of like 2/3 of the way down. So like I said, I've just gotten some budgets approved this week. And what they did is they actually added it. And in other cases, gave housing authorities more money because they're trying to get everybody's reserve up to 50%. So before, like an hour ago, I literally just calculated this, and I'm going to guess that they're going to change this number by about $90,000 and give you $90,000 more than is in this budget. I don't want to change it because I want them to change it because they did it wrong. They're calculating it. Their calculation is flawed in some cases, and I just don't want to get through, but you'll probably understand this. So, like I said, I've done the June budgets, and then they get the budgets, and they look at the reserves, and they say, how much do we need to get this housing authority based on their June year-end financial statement to get to 50%? And then they did their calculation, and they put it in the budget, and they're sending that money to the state, to the housing authority. With the September budgets I did, they did not have the year ends yet. So they used last year's year end, which isn't the right way to do it because the housing authorities have lost money during the year. So when they do yours, they're going to use last year's year end because your year end financials are not going to be done till the middle of February. They're due at the end of February. Your year end is December 31st. So by the time the year end's done, it'll be the middle of February. These budgets will probably be approved by then. So they're going to go back and use the 2023 year end, not the projected number I have, which I expect your reserve at the end of this year to be 125,000, which is on that sheet. You see it, it's like all the way down. Your actual reserve at 106 is $167,000 at the end of last year. So I have a feeling what's going to happen, and I've been sending emails to people just to make sure I'm clear, because I want them to understand they're really not funding people at 50% if they're going by the 2023 year-end financials, because there's a whole year in between where factors have changed. So I have a feeling what's going to happen is they're going to approve the budgets, and then we're going to have to do a revision just to ask for the difference, the extra money, another extra $35,000. I can almost guarantee it because I already just started doing it with somebody else whose budgets got approved 6 weeks ago. Like I said, you're the third quarter of housing authority. So they're going to bump up they're getting a lot of money from somewhere. So they're going to bump this reserve up to 50%, which really, if you just took 581, it's almost $291,000, where we're projecting it to be 200 now. So that's why I'm saying they're going to probably bump that number up by $90,000. And just to get some reference, I always put this in there because I was curious. Like, there was a time when the housing authority was completely broke. And in 2017, the reserve for this program was $30,000. So just put that in perspective. And this does not count any income that the housing authority gets from your capital improvement money that you can draw down. Because I don't want to add that in. You want to book it when you get it. So the idea is to have the reserve be over 50% by the end of 2025, not below it, not right at it. You want it to be above it, And I think this budget will accomplish that. And that's kind of like, that's where doing this for my 30 years and going housing authority by housing authority, my job is to maximize, based on the rules and the budget, what the housing authority has the ability to get access to in terms of funding. That's the point of the budget and how I do the budget. Like, if the rules are, we're going to fund you up to 50%, I want to make sure they're using the right number and give you the maximum number you're allowed to get. So I think that this accomplishes that. And this is really the key to your state budget. This is your state operating budget. We put in some non-routine costs. That's also behind here. So I also do a budget for the entire housing authority, because you can't do a budget for one program without doing the entire housing authority. It's just not logical. So I have pages for each program that I'm not going to get into as detailed as this, because the changes are mostly the same. This page, I don't give this to everybody, but I just wanted to kind of drive the point home on how this works. And this is like how your cap is calculated. And that's, if you look, you can see the 841,463, which is the number on page 1. And I was curious for myself, really, how much has this gone up in 3 years? Between the 9% in 23, the 13% in 24, the 12% in 25, it's gone up $207,000. That's the number in the back, the bottom, the last number there. And that's how it's calculated. They give you money for a resident service coordinator. They give you money for legal services. If you look and you say, well, what is this retirees group insurance? What is this property insurance? Back in the day, which is probably 10 years ago, if your health insurance went up, you were allowed to request the funding for that and increase your cap by that increase, because you couldn't afford it. And at a certain point, they said, that's it. We're going to fund you what we funded you in the past, but you cannot increase that line item anymore. That's it. Whatever it is, it can stay, but you can't increase it anymore. You have to absorb it in the cap, which is pretty easy to do since they keep increasing the cap by these big percentages over the last couple of years. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So that's where those
Yep.
frozen exemptions come from. They've been there for 10 years, maybe longer. So that's how that cap gets calculated, in case anybody's ever wondering. Fun accounting stuff. So the next couple pages are just the salary schedules. I went into the housing authority and sat down with Cheryl for a couple hours one day, and we went through this line by line. The director is based on the new contract and the new salary schedule, which also has to be submitted to DHCD. And the page 4 is the maintenance labor, of which Cheryl wanted to put in pretty much almost a 9% across the board, which was able to fit because of the new rules. And one of the things, if you look, the maintenance overtime was reduced to 32,000 from 40,000 to 32 to make it work. But that 32,000 was what was in the original budget last year, and it was plenty. So just understand, we didn't really cut anything. We just had to increase it to 40 for last year's revision to get the number to the right level to be able to do what you wanted to do this year. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, but it's never going to happen again. It's a one-year thing. So that's the maintenance salaries.
Can I
Page
make
5.
a comment before we go on? I just trying to deal with the sizing of the screen here, but I always like to remind people of this, that over here we have sort of the salaries and the positions here that we're considering. This case, this is the management and administrative positions here. But then what Rick has to do is allocate them to each one of our programs. Let me get that, see if I can get it. So we have, the 689 program. Let's see if I can do it. So if you see these columns here, this is allocating the total 25 budget for each line item, each position line item, to our state programs, our federal programs, our Section 8 programs, et cetera, et cetera. Rick, did I get that right?
100%. Yes. I did have to add one line that wasn't in there last year. And I know in the contract, there was a proposed up to a $10,000 bonus for the director.
hmm
And just so you can see that column I added, because that can only get charged to the federal programs.
right.
It can't get charged to the state. So that's why that's there. That's new. I just
Yeah.
added that in so you can see the full potential compensation. And then, there were some changes in job titles, and a couple of these positions are open right now, which I'll talk about when we get to Section 8, because it affects your Section 8 a little bit.
I think it's up to a 10% bonus of, if memory serves me, 10% of the base salary, not 10,000, just for your, just
Okay.
make a note to check that again.
Either way, that's not really part of the state, so you'll be
No.
okay, whatever you
No,
decide.
I
to do.
just want to kind of note that as we go by
Yep,
here.
absolutely. I thought I heard 10%. I mean 10,000. So, but whatever it is, I mean,
You have the contract, so just double check whatever it says in there.
10% is 8,500, so we're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Reg, a couple of questions if I could.
Yep.
So building on what you said, Reg, just walking it back, 4,001 is Linden Chambers, right? 689 is Matthew's House.
Yep.
65.1 is Seabed's Cook and IROC. So that's the allocation. And then Rick, you had mentioned earlier that there is a rolled up consolidated view across. I thought you said more than just the administrative salaries. Do we have is that what you said? And do we have a copy
I'm not,
of that?
I don't know. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So just as this is a rolled up of all administrative salaries, do we also
Yep.
have a rolled up view of all NHA budgeted expenses across all? Just rolled up and consolidated?
Oh, like in one page kind of thing?
Yeah.
I don't usually do that. I could. I mean, I could
Okay.
get.
We don't have to do that for this, but eventually in the future, just as it's good to see the roll up here and see that
Yeah.
aggregate, and also like to see the operating reserves relative to that too. It's a
Sure.
little easier to compare and contrast.
Listen, actually, I do that for a couple clients already. I mean, I'll do it for. I don't think I can get it done for your board meeting next week,
No,
but I'll do it for January.
Future
I
purposes.
kind of like doing
Yeah.
it, so I don't
Good.
mind doing it for you.
Yeah.
Just so you can
Thanks.
see it all on one page. It does make it easier. But when I usually get clients from other people, they give them that, but what they don't give them is the page one that shows the changes, which that's much more informative, but it's much easier to look at a housing authority overall budget on one sheet of paper that gives you the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I agree. That's a good thing to do.
Especially with those year-over-year trends and stuff.
Yep.
But all good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Yep. So that's how the salaries get prorated. And the same thing with maintenance labor. By program, same programs. There's been no changes other than some changes in the job descriptions. And like you said, you got the 2 state programs and the 1 federal public program. The Section 8 doesn't have maintenance labor charged to it because it's an administrative program. So you'll never see any maintenance labor charged to a Section 8 program. Doesn't exist.
All right. One more thing, back to that last page on the open positions. Just wanted to confirm the status of current open positions.
Yep. That's page 3, right?
Yeah, let me go
Yes.
down there.
So
Somebody stop scrolling here. Why is this?
there you go. Yep.
So yeah, it shows here that as our assistant executive director position is opened. It open is budgeted for. Whoops.
Yep.
But and then I guess we have a state manager housing position. Oh, we're not budgeting for that, right? Oh, we're changing that. Can you walk through what this says here on the left column here, Rick?
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Cheryl gave me this information, and believe me, went through for hours about a month ago. So I think she moved some people around. She changed their titles, but you still got to put in the 24 budget numbers to move into 25.
Yeah.
So if you look, you'll see some positions where, like, for example, I removed the administrative assistant to the executive director. That's just gone. that didn't go anywhere else, that just didn't fit.
Mhm.
It didn't fit anywhere because there were some people that got changes in their job description where their income went up.
Mhm.
I mean, it's hard to follow. It's hard for me to follow. All I know is you have an assistant director position that's not filled,
Mhm.
and you have one other position that's still in here that's not filled.
That's the housing manager.
Right.
So we
Those two
have a,
positions are open.
right. So we still have we have a senior state housing manager. So the previous housing manager was promoted to senior state housing manager, but we kept that housing manager state on the books because if for some reason the senior state public housing manager leaves, we're not going to hire that person again. We're going to hire a state public housing manager. I'm going to go back to the original position. So the senior state public housing manager with special projects is a new position. And the other open position is the leased and public housing director. It says no longer director there, but you kept it on the books, might not get filled, either one or the other.
Right. It's one or the other. So there's still some stuff in limbo.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I just want to make sure there's enough money in there so Cheryl has the flexibility when the decision gets made to have the funding available to make it one way or the other.
Great.
Um,
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And then the non-routine schedule is very basic. What I always do with the non-routine, unless I have specific items, is put in some additional turnover costs, which you did have this year. And this is kind of based on the current year's actual turnover costs. And remember, they're going to look at this number actually to give you extra money to cover it. You always have appliances, you know, if you look at replacement of equipment. And then I put in some maintenance equipment, of which kind of after I had the budgets done, Cheryl mentioned, what was it that you wanted? What?
a walk behind lawnmower.
Okay.
And a sprayer for the
Right,
paint
so
sprayer.
I put the money
For
in
the
there now, and
apartments, so-
the appliances are high, so it should kind of work out when
Yeah.
the items are purchased.
Yeah.
I'm glad I did that because I just put it in there just to make sure in case I missed something or
Yeah.
something was missed. And you know, that's just a guide. If things always come up during the year that you need to do or need to spend money on, you could do it. And if it's something that's a little big or unusual, I always put it in quote extraordinary maintenance, because that's way when you get the financial statements every month, it shows up on a detailed schedule. So you can see if you did something unusual. You know, like what are these extra costs? Well, every program I do, when I do the financial statements, I do a balance sheet, an operating statement, and a statement of non-routine expenses. So you can see that. So you can see that if something comes up during the year that you had to pay for that we didn't expect, that's not part of regular operating costs. So that's kind of the point behind that. You know, so the rest of the pages are now the other summary pages mostly for the other programs. And this is Matthew's house as it's labeled. You know, it's only 8 units. And you'll look in the reserves projected to be about $27,000 in that program. The rent is projected to go up this year. I don't know, did you get official confirmation on that yet, Cheryl, or?
No, we're still negotiating the contract.
Okay, I will tell you, I don't know if, you know, I'm not really privy to the negotiations with these things, but I will tell you, I was actually just working on a client today and I noticed that 689 rents went up dramatically.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, what happened here? And they said, well, the DHCD minimum, which is published in the guidelines, they argued you need to go up to that number. So I just keep that in mind when you're negotiating.
Yeah.
There's a number in the guidelines. It's a per unit rental amount that, you know, that should be your starting point in theory. And I know in the past, they've been kind of tough on the negotiations, a little bit more so than what I'm used to seeing in other places. So I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah, they're a little tough.
Yeah, not quite sure why. I don't quite understand the dynamic there. But in effect, you know, you can't really go by the percentage of the reserve in this case. You don't really look at the percentage for this program because it's only 8 units. It's teeny tiny.
Yep.
So, you know, $5,000 will change that percentage by like 40%. So it's not like the other program where, you know, if you had $40,000, you'd be okay. You're not like penalized because you're over 100%. You know, you would never want to be over 100% on the other one, the big state program, and you don't have to worry about it because you're never getting there. There's just no possible way. You know, so that's your state. Those are your 2 state programs. Those are the ones that you vote on. You do the certifications. They get mailed into DHCD. Then Cheryl submits the budgets, and then they start the review process. And I would expect them to get approved because I have not had one, which is actually unusual because there's always something, some quirky little thing that they might not like. But I haven't had one get kicked back yet. And I've had almost 2/3 of them that I've done so far get approved as submitted. So the only thing they've changed is that augmentation number, which is a good thing. We want them to change that. We want them to make that bigger. So that's good. They actually told me not to put any number in there. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put a number in there and you guys change it. As opposed to just not putting anything in there. Cause I deal with them enough. I know how to handle these situations. That's all I'll say. Page 7 is your federal budget. Okay, there. Somebody just walked in my house, so if the dog starts barking, you know why. It's somebody that lives here, so it's okay. Okay, so the page 7 is your federal budget. This does not get submitted to DHCD, but I mean, you can't do your state budget without doing your federal budget because they're all intertwined. The salaries get prorated to the different programs. The maintenance men work at the federal just as well as the state. And most of the changes are relatively consistent with the other programs. So going line by line won't really make much difference. But you can see the one thing I did increase pretty dramatically was contract costs. And once again, it was the exact same stuff as the state program. It was the rubbish that has definitely gone up over the last year or two. That's gone up pretty significantly. Yeah. And plumbing and heating repairs. You know, those are the 2 biggies. Yeah. So you can see in October financial, you had spent 103, so I bumped it up to 127. Okay. And you can see we were, you know, pretty under budgeted that last year. So the point is we know why, and we corrected it in the new budget. And if you go down to the bottom, you can see even now the budget is budgeted to lose $70,000 in this case. And to be honest, I thought it would be more than that because these expenses are pretty high and there's a lot of maintenance costs in the federal, even more so than the state. And but if you look, your reserve is still over $400,000 in that program. Once again, that program reserve was basically down to nothing like 8 years ago. So you've built it up, you know, and the operating expenses, they're not doing the same cap increases they're doing with the state. You know, you're not getting a 13, 12, 9% increase every single year in the feds like you are with the state. I think they increased it like 2%. There's a subsidy calculation I do. And the good news about is that's actually been done and accepted and approved by the feds already. So those numbers that I have in there for income and subsidy, the 531, 40, 36, about 2/3 down, that's an actual number. That's like your real number. That's the real thing. Now they might fund it at what they do occasionally is they fund it at like say 95%. One year they funded it at 115%. So there is a range there that we don't know what they're going to do when they decide to do it. And they won't make that decision for like 6 more months. So we don't really know exactly how they're going to treat that, but it's going to be very close to that number. You know, and so, you know, you're still over $400,000. And I know you get a lot of redevelopment costs and some of the money is going to be going towards that. So just understand where your reserve is. And, you know, I think through all this redevelopment activity, what my approach is make sure we're booking the costs that you got, but also make sure these programs are accounted for correctly, so you don't have to worry about this part of it while you guys are working on your redevelopment stuff. Now, I have a couple housing authorities that are a little bit further into this process than as you are. I think actually one of your federal ones you had one that was about to start, right, Cheryl, and it got halted, the Section 8 conversion.
Yeah, that was right. That was the Section 22 RAD conversion. So we had to pivot back to another funding mechanism.
Right.
Section 18, RAD Section 18. So, and that application is in now.
Right.
You know, and I'm
Well,
just thinking, talking to you, Rick, it's probably good time for a, as an action item here to just give you an update on where things stand. Just on the federal side as well as the state side here. So maybe we can find some time to do that.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever. So there's your federal budget. So the reserves are all pretty good across the board. And the good thing is the state's going to give you like a big chunk of money to make sure you're kind of even across the board. The last page is your Section 8 budget, which is like your leased housing Section 8. I estimated the income probably a little low. And your reserve for that one is projected to be, still over $100,000. But the administrative expenses are kind of catching up with that. If you look, I just want to explain this a little bit. You notice how we talked about the admin salaries and those open positions. Currently, it's the managing or the maintaining of the Section 8 program is being done by subcontractors. And that's why you can see there's a high expense level of subcontractors in the Section 8 program. One of the things when I talk to Cheryl is like, I want to make sure I understand this because my understanding is those contractors are there because those positions are open. So as long as those positions are open, what I would look at when you're looking at the 2025 financial statements is look at the underrun in salaries versus the overrun in administrative other. Because you don't want to because say you don't fill those positions till March or April. So these contractors are still going to be working. So you're going to go way over in your 4190, but you're going to be way under in your administrative salaries. And my rule, which is a rule I've learned a long time ago, is even if you thought you weren't going to fund those positions or have them filled till April, you do not want to reduce that number in the salary line item. Because once you take it out, it's a lot harder to get it back in. It's almost impossible. So you want to just understand the financials and realize, you could have them filled. I don't know where you're at in the process at this point, Cheryl, but you could have them filled in the middle of January and it won't matter. But expect to see underruns in salaries and overruns in administrative other because of the subcontractors. That will happen.
Yeah.
And like I said, as long as they're close, then we'll be okay. And not only that, but the admin fee will probably go up sometime in 25, but they have not published that yet. It could go up, between 5 and 8%. And, if you get 5% would be another $10,000 and you'd be pretty close to breaking even instead of losing money. So I know that admin fee goes up. It goes up every year, but I don't know what it is. So I didn't want to guesstimate it because it's kind of inconsistent. So overall the reserves are good. They're going to be better when the one program with relatively low reserves from a percentage point of view, but not really that low, is your state program. Those should be up to about $300,000. And you'll be able to operate efficiently while you're working on all the projects you're working on. Basically, that's kind of the whole master plan here.
Rick, just a small question here while we're before we leave this one. You've got 120 Section 8 units, and I think we got three more. It's now 123. I'm just wondering about that.
That wouldn't affect the admin fee because I already calculated.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew that. I just didn't change that number because I don't use it for anything.
Okay.
That was just a miss on my part.
Yeah.
It's 123 on all the sheets.
Yeah, right.
So, except for the the one that matters, not really, but like for salaries, it's based on 123. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
Super. So, are we at the end of your presentation?
yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, everything looks good. I think I adjusted
So
the
I'm gonna
expenses up to realistic levels. I think it looks good.
stop the share so we can see each other and see if any commissioners have any questions. I can bring up a sheet if we need to, and also just let any attendees, if they have a comment or question for Rick, just to raise your hand and we'll get around to that in due course. But first, we'll start with the commissioners. So let me start with you, Jim.
Nothing more than what I've already asked. Thank you.
Okay, great. Ed, Mr.
I thought-
Treasurer, Ed Scheidler and Penny Kirk.
I feel it was very easy to understand. Thank you.
Thank
Rick.
you. Thanks. Thank you.
Janice, any questions or comments?
No, I don't have any. He always does a great job. I always recognize him by his presentations.
Thanks.
And it's
Thank you.
Jim's doing it for the first time, but it's good that you get the same presentation every year, 2 or 3 years in a row, and it starts to stick in your head here. So
That's true. I've noticed that a long time. When I get a new client or there's a new director, I'm like, just give it a year or two. It'll make more sense after the first time, because now you'll see the statements. You went through the budgets. Now you'll see the statements over the course of the year. And then when we do next year's budgets, you're going to go, oh yeah, okay. I get it. I see exactly what you're talking about. Because there are some elements to housing authority accounting and budgeting that aren't always logical.
great.
And that, they have specific rules and regulations and ways of doing things that sometimes don't quite, they fly in the face of logic every once in a while.
Great. And Cheryl, do you have any comments or questions you want to add here?
I did just want to add, Rick and I talked about it. One of the things that was most important to me that we increased the line item for trainings that, I proposed a great deal of trainings for our staff in FY 2025, myself and our staff. And, I checked in with Greg in terms of the equipment that he needs, and he's proposing a blower, a paint blower for the units, and that's going to help us cut down too on some of our contractual trades when our guys can do it themselves in a quicker period of time than contracting that out. And in terms of our consultant, Section 8, we are actually at a good place right now. We will not be using them as much as we had in the past. So we're sort of triaging it more ourselves until that position is filled. So all good things. So far, so good. All good projections for 2025.
Would it be fair to say that, salary and benefits of an employee are likely to be less than the hourly rate or whatever the rate is of the consultant?
Of course, but it's such a complicated program, and you need that expertise.
Oh, I'm not saying,
Yeah,
but I'm just saying,
so
what
that
Rick
that's
warned
covered.
about is watching the shift between the two line items.
That's
It
right.
should be
yeah.
shifting in a fashion that doesn't overrun the budget if we're replacing an hourly contractor with an employee.
Correct.
Yeah, he and I talked about that, and
Yep.
so I'm close to doing that. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we're not using those hours as much because we're doing some of the legwork that the consultant has been doing. I do have a good candidate that I'm scheduled to interview at the first of the year, but hopefully we can do just what you suggest, Rick, in that get someone in by January. But it's complicated. It's very complicated, and sometimes it's out of my control.
My advice, if you want it, is don't rush it.
Yeah.
Because you got the contractors while you're looking for the right person, because you want to make sure you get the right person. Because if you hire somebody and they're there for 3 months and then they leave, I've had this happen at so many housing authorities. It's just it's like a revolving nightmare.
It's horrible.
Yeah, so just keep an eye on that.
Because that's the platform we're.
I don't think we want any
have to.
revolving nightmares. Never
No,
heard
but
that
it's
one
there.
before,
I've been there, done that.
It certainly has quite an image there. I would though maybe segue this part of the discussion, Cheryl, to the assistant executive director position and whether whether how and when and how things are going there, because it's hard to find the right person for that as well. It's the same kind of.
Correct. But I do have a good person and looks good on paper. Looks really great on paper. So
Mhm.
we just need to bring the person in and have a conversation with that. It's a gentleman, and hopefully things will work out.
Because I know I speak for everybody on the board. We know how hard you are working, and we think it's too much, and you think it's too much, and your children and grandchildren and everybody else thinks it's too much. So, really great if we can, and I've got my fingers crossed on that, finding the right person. But I do think Rick's point is the same point. You got to find the right person.
Mhm.
It doesn't do any good if somebody comes in and then, can't stand the heat of the kitchen or whatever the metaphor is, and we lose them in 3 months. So, it's a tough thing. Okay, I see if there are no other comments from the commissioners, I see we have Ross Donald has his hand up. And let's just see, Ross, we should be able to hear you. Go ahead. You're on mute though.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah,
We
I
can
just
hear
had
you.
I just had a couple of questions, if that's okay
Yes,
for Mr.
please go
Shaw.
ahead.
It's really fascinating to hear how things compare, with the other housing authorities that you have a chance to look at. And I was wondering if you are able to pick out any kind of special um, projects along the lines of mold, asbestos, remediation, things like that. Were you able to pick out any numbers that might be in line, out of line for that? And also in another category, how do we compare with other housing authorities regarding legal expenses?
And Rick, may I interject because I forgot you wouldn't know this, but the Linden Chambers Tenant Association was recently certified a month or two ago, is up and running, and Ross Donald is the president of the Tenants Association. So I just thought you ought to know that.
Oh, thank you. Sure.
Okay,
Go
well,
ahead,
I
Rick.
don't really know about the mold situation.
hmm Well, just special construction projects, either because of age or some problem, anything out of line like that, I'm thinking.
Okay, so just so you understand how that works, that's actually part of your capital program. That's not part of the operating budget.
Okay.
So there's a whole nother department that's separate from the operating budget that deals with that. Actually, Cheryl would know way more about that than I would, because you have different capital plans for different projects in your developments. And I just make sure they're accounted for correctly.
Right.
The housing authority
Okay.
expresses what they need to do with that funding. They get an annual allotment. And then my job is to make sure it's funded correctly and that you get all the money you need to finish the job and that you draw it down and that, vice versa.
Right.
So every housing authority has completely different needs with that capital money.
Mm.
Regarding the legal, I have housing authorities much smaller than yours that have much higher legal costs. So
Yeah.
it fluctuates dramatically depending on the tenant cases and the legal cases involved at the housing authorities. So I do have a housing authority, I'll tell you, that's half the size of Needham, that's got twice the legal costs. So it really fluctuates depending on the tenants and the lack of payment of rent and then the whole legal process that's needed to go through, that you're required to go through.
All right. Just curious. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ross.
Mhm.
One other thing I just thought of actually, is that I wanted to call out that I think relative to past 3 or 4 years, we don't have any major capital expenses to buy vehicles or replace vehicles or, this year. And I think I would just ask maybe Cheryl or Rick about that. I mean, are we pretty much maybe we've sort of turned over our more ancient and decrepit vehicles by now, and so we're in pretty good shape, or just wanted to ask about that.
No, so I think in 2022, we did put in for the truck and then for a car for our employees. We just spent the truck. We just purchased a truck, submitted a requisition to purchase that truck. So that's done. We will need a car for our staff because they go currently quite a bit to the different developments to do recertifications, etc. So they're submitting mileage reimbursements for that. But ideally, it would be great if we had a car that they could use and would not be submitting the reimbursement for their mileage.
But not in the 25 budget.
It's not
There's
in
a truck in the
25 budget.
24 budget that I think you guys just bought,
Right.
Truck,
Right.
yeah,
but not a car.
but not a car. We'll have to put that in the next budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then the last question I always like to ask you, and I inherited this question. And
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Heather, this is not my original question, but I always think it's a pretty good question from past chairs of the
Yep.
Housing Authority, going back to the beginning, is, you audit, you do the fee accounting for about what, 80 housing authorities?
About 70.
70 or 80 of them.
Yep.
And overall, just qualitatively, how do we stand in terms of being in good financial shape relative to all your other customers? What percentile are we in, or however
To be
you
honest,
like to characterize
without
it?
going through the list, I'd say 50%, like right in the middle at
Mhm,
this point, maybe a little bit better because
Mhm.
you're healthy across the board.
mhm,
You don't have like a one program that's super broke or
mhm,
poor, and that makes a difference. You're healthy across the board. You have
mhm,
4 programs, and none of them have reserves that are alarming.
mhm,
They're not the highest reserves, but they're not alarming.
mhm.
So you're in overall good shape and comparable to most housing authorities.
And our reserves are adequate against, rainy
Correct.
day fund stuff that needs to, be accommodated.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And is it a fair thing to say that we don't necessarily want to aspire to be in the top 25% or top 5% of good shape, because that means that we actually have more reserves than we really need, and we're
Right.
not
I
really
mean,
putting them to
e-
work.
every board meeting I do and every housing authority I talk to, they kind of have different issues. I can go to a board meeting and say, you guys can't spend a dime. You're overspending these line items, you're overspending the budgets, your reserves are going down. Then I can go to another housing authority and be like, you guys have to start spending your money. Like your reserves are going up too high. If you need a truck, buy a truck. Like you guys bought your truck in 24. That's kind of actually worked out really well because that's going to get calculated to figure out how much money they're going to give you to bring the reserve up. Not to get overly technical, but that's a good thing. It's really housing authority by housing authority, and there's so many different factors that play into that. I think one of the big things you're going to see, and I'll explain that, you'll see this in the statement. There's a line item called retained revenue. And that's where the money that you get for admin fee for these capital projects is going to go into that line item. And I'll explain this to Cheryl when it starts coming in. And you'll be able to see that. So you'll be able to see how much of a difference that actually makes. Because in some of my housing authorities, that makes a huge difference. And then when you want to buy that truck in 25 or that car in 26, or that truck or that van, you're going to be able to do it because you drew that money down. That's going to be a big determinant in that. So just keep that in mind.
Great. Well, I think we're at the end of the presentation. If nobody has any further discussions, maybe a commissioner would want to make a motion to approve the 2025 budget as presented by Mr. Shaw and Cheryl.
I so move.
So moved by Janice. Do I have a second? Second. Is there any final discussion? Hearing none, I will call the vote. Reg Foster votes aye.
Jim Flanagan votes aye.
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk, aye.
Janice Bennett votes aye.
That's great. So I think we're done. And thank you, everybody. It's just a little bit after 6 o'clock, so I think some of us or all of us can get some dinner on time today. I'm not sure we'll be able to do so next Thursday with the additional agenda items we have. But everybody have a nice evening, and we'll see you in a week.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks, and
Rick.
happy
Good
holidays,
seeing
Rick.
you. Good
Bye-bye.
seeing you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Marshall.